Hello to the wonderful and dedicated audience of Sci-fi stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled the monetization features of our channel, leaving us without the operational budget needed to continue our work. If you find today's story engaging and worthwhile, please consider supporting us with just $1. This small contribution ensures our team has the funds to cover their living expenses and can continue creating these thrilling universes for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comments section. Now, please immerse yourself in the darkness of the cosmos. The board of directors for the Kalin Interplanetary Corporation operated in the absolute shadows of their obsidian spire, dictating the fate of billions across the galaxy. They were the undisputed apex rulers of the known spiral arm, beings of cold, calculating logic and terrifying influence. Yet, the decree they issued that cycle was an unprecedented anomaly in the sprawling, violent history of their dominant species. Traditionally, the elite scions of the Kalin bloodline were shipped off to the most prestigious and brutal military academies the cosmos had to offer, trained to conquer through overwhelming firepower and tactical supremacy. This time, the board chose differently. They bypassed the grand institutions and reached down into the dark, criminal underbelly of the universe to hire a solitary human. His name was Antonio Atkinson, and he was brought in to serve as a practical, hands-on survival instructor. Antonio was transported out of the shadows and straight into a breathtaking skyscraper complex situated directly in the heart of the galactic center. The atmosphere inside the training facility was stifling, thick with the scent of sterilized ozone and the silent, heavy pressure of corporate supremacy. He brought nothing with him but the clothes on his back and a personal dossier that would terrify even a seasoned mercenary. His record was a tangled, deeply encrypted web of classified disasters, unexplained massacres, and heavy judicial penalties stemming from a dark, forgotten past. He did not look like a corporate mentor or a savior. He looked like a man who had walked through the fires of hell and decided to keep the ashes. The heavy, blast-proof doors of the chamber parted with a quiet hiss, revealing the 5 chosen heirs. They swaggered into the room, their attitudes drenched in undisguised disdain and supreme arrogance. These youths were genetic marvels, possessing towering physical frames that housed terrifying, raw, muscular power. Gleaming, naturally occurring armored scales protected their vital points, shimmering under the stark synthetic lights. They carried themselves with the absolute certainty of those who possessed infinite financial power and biological superiority. To them, the scarred, silent human, standing in the center of the room was a joke, a fragile speck of dust that could be crushed under their boots without a second thought. There was no formal introduction. There was no bow of respect, and absolutely no winding explanation of the curriculum. Antonio simply stood there, his eyes cold and calculating. Without warning, he subtly shifted his arm. A dilapidated, heavily modified peripheral device, cobbled together from rusted scrap metal and exposed wiring, slid from his tattered sleeve into his waiting hand. With a single press of a physical switch, Antonio unleashed a localized digital plague. He instantly and effortlessly disabled the multi-billion credit security matrix of the fortress. The lethal laser grids died, the kinetic shields collapsed, and the advanced biometric locks short-circuited in a shower of sparks. The sudden, blinding vulnerability of the impregnable room triggered the heirs instantly. Panic and aggressive genetic combat instincts flared to life. They concluded immediately that this was a deadly trap, that the seemingly weak human was an elite, deep-cover assassin sent by a rival faction to terminate their royal bloodline. Roaring with primal, terrifying fury, all 5 heirs launched a coordinated assault against Antonio. Their armored fists tore through the air, carrying enough kinetic energy to shatter solid plasteel plating. They fully intended to obliterate the fragile human body where he stood, turning him into a mist of blood and bone. Antonio did not throw a punch. He did not brace for the impact, nor did he flinch away from the incoming death. He simply activated a secondary function on his battered device, hijacking the dormant environmental magnetic barriers of the room. He turned the very architecture of the facility into his own weapon. As the airs closed in, Antonio manipulated the invisible magnetic currents, flawlessly redirecting the immense physical force of their own attacks against them. The crushing blow of the leading air was smoothly diverted, smashing squarely into the armored chest of the second attacker. The remaining three lost their footing as the magnetic floor violently shifted, their massive bodies crashing into one another in a chaotic, brutal pileup. The very strength they prided themselves on became the instrument of their rapid destruction. They had effectively beaten each other into submission in a matter of seconds, falling to the ground in a pathetic tangle of bruised scales and groaning limbs. The dust settled, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence in the ruined chamber. Antonio stood exactly where he had been from the start, completely unharmed, staring down at the apex predators whimpering at his feet. One of the heirs struggled to raise their heavy head, spitting out a mouthful of glowing blood. The young alien stared at Antonio, the immense arrogance completely replaced by a chilling realization and absolute dread. The heir swallowed hard and asked a question that shattered the quiet room. Why does a weak human look and feel exactly like an apex predator? The training did not begin with martial stances or combat drills. It began with the brutal stripping of privilege. Before the heirs could fully recover from the humiliating physical defeat in the gleaming tower, Antonio herded them onto a decrepit freight elevator that plunged into the very bowels of the megacity. Down they went, past the glittering upper echelons, sinking for over 40 minutes into the choking, neon-lit abyss of the technological slums. The air here tasted of rust, stale ozone, and desperation. The artificial lighting was a sickly yellow, flickering over mountains of discarded machinery and rivers of toxic chemical runoff. Here, at the bottom of the world. Antonio forcefully stripped them of their advanced defensive shielding, their biometrically locked kinetic weapons, and their customized communication links. He left them shivering in the damp, freezing fog, wearing nothing but standard-issue synthetic rags that offered absolutely no protection against the elements or the predators lurking in the shadows. Their outrage was instantaneous, but it turned to absolute terror when they tried to access their subcutaneous emergency beacons. Nothing happened. Antonio had deployed a proprietary encryption algorithm, a ghostly piece of code he had written entirely from scratch in the dark corners of the galactic net. It wrapped around their personal networks like a suffocating python. Millions of digital credits, infinite banking reserves, and immediate access to their private mercenary armies were utterly severed. Their net worth had dropped from uncountable billions to zero in a fraction of a second. They were completely invisible to the upper world, erased from the grid. Antonio stood in the rain, his voice cutting through the hiss of a broken steam pipe. Your vast wealth is currently a mathematical illusion. Your armor is gone. To survive your first 24 hours in this gutter, you have one single objective. 5 blocks north is the territory of the Ironjaw Syndicate, a gang of heavily mechanized scavengers. You must steal a high-capacity plasma energy core from their central vault and bring it back here. If you leave a single drop of blood, a strand of hair, or a fingerprint, they will hunt you down and sell your exotic organs on the black market. Do not leave a biological trace, used to solving problems by simply crushing them. The heirs sneered at the task. They marched northward, relying entirely on their towering physical presence and natural armored scales to intimidate the slum dwellers. They found the Syndicate headquarters, a fortified scrapyard heavily guarded by cyborg thugs. Instead of planning an infiltration, the heirs decided to smash through the front gate, confident their raw strength would overwhelm the locals within seconds. They were horrifyingly wrong. The Iron Jaw Syndicate did not fight with fists. As soon as the heirs breached the perimeter, the gang triggered a massive optical illusion maze. The physical walls around the heirs dissolved into blinding fractals of neon light and shifting holographic geometries. The ground beneath their feet seemed to tilt and vanish. Deafening white noise flooded their auditory receptors. The Kalen heirs swung their massive arms, striking empty air and shattering holographic projections, while the actual cyborg thugs circled them like laughing hyenas. Spatial awareness evaporated. The heirs crashed into each other, entirely blinded by the aggressive light assault. Their legendary physical prowess rendered completely useless when they could not even perceive the true location of their enemies. 2 streets over, Antonio sat inside a rotting observation post located on the 4th floor of an abandoned tenement building. Rain dripped steadily through the cracked ceiling. He leaned back in a broken chair, calmly sipping hot black coffee from a dented tin thermos. His cold eyes tracked every panicked movement of the heirs through a bank of stolen security monitors. He had hacked the syndicate cameras 15 minutes before the heirs even arrived at the scrapyard. He watched the grand elite of the galaxy stumble around like blind animals in a cage. Suddenly, the situation escalated from humiliating to lethal. A frustrated gang lieutenant, tired of the game, hoisted a localized thermonuclear shoulder cannon and aimed it directly at the chest of the largest heir. The weapon hummed, gathering a critical charge that would vaporize the heir regardless of his natural armor. Antonio did not blink. He lazily reached out with his free hand and tapped a sequence on his battered terminal. A focused, micro-electromagnetic pulse shot out from a relay he had planted earlier. The EMP hit the gang lieutenant perfectly. The thermonuclear weapon sparked violently, its targeting systems glitching and firing the devastating blast harmlessly into the stormy sky above, showering the street in harmless sparks. Through the hidden audio feed, Antonio broadcasted his voice directly into the inner ears of the terrified heirs. His tone was as flat and unforgiving as a gravestone. Muscle power is absolute garbage when your enemy knows how to attack your mind and your data. You cannot punch a hologram. You cannot strangle a software virus. You are failing because you think like beasts, not like survivors. The heirs retreated into the shadows, panting, bruised, and utterly defeated. The heavy rain washed away their remaining arrogance. As they huddled in the dark alleyway, shivering in their ragged clothes, they looked up toward the general direction of the observation post. The contempt that had previously burned in their eyes was completely extinguished. It was replaced by a gnawing, desperate curiosity, deeply intertwined with a profound fear. They were beginning to realize that the silent, scarred human sitting in the dark possessed a tactical mind, more terrifying than any weapon they had ever known. The temperature plummeted drastically as a harsh, unyielding radioactive winter descended upon the sprawling, outer industrial zones of the megacity. Thick layers of glowing, toxic ash choked the dense atmosphere, completely freezing all commercial trade routes and effectively blocking every known logistical escape path. The automated quarantine protocols slammed shut across the sector boundaries. They were entirely trapped in a wasteland of frozen concrete and poisoned air. In the bitter, biting cold. Antonio decisively shifted their brutal curriculum from physical evasion to the dark arts of underground economics. He demonstrated exactly how to manipulate the vicious, shadow-driven black market. Antonio taught the bewildered alien heirs how to barter dangerous rumors, how to forge complex digital transit logs, and how to ruthlessly leverage the desperate needs of dying scavengers to acquire critical medical resources. He showed them how to obtain essential survival gear without spending a single digital credit. They traded a stolen, encrypted access code for 30 doses of radiation sickness antibiotics and exchanged a whispered secret regarding a rival smuggling gang for 5 liters of synthetic blood replenishers. However, their newly acquired wealth of medical supplies instantly made them high-value targets. During a highly volatile, tense transaction with a heavily armed faction of desperate underground rebels inside a collapsed subterranean subway tunnel, negotiations violently broke down. The rebel leader, paranoid and twitchy from chemical stimulants, ordered his heavily augmented mercenaries to surround the unarmed group. In a sudden blur of motion, a cybernetic mercenary lunged forward with lethal intent. Antonio, whose spatial awareness and combat reflexes had thus far been absolutely flawless, seemingly made a fatal tactical error. He deliberately pivoted, leaving his entire left flank completely exposed to the attacker. The mercenary drove a jagged, toxic-coated combat blade deep into the side of the human. Thick, crimson blood soaked through his heavy, worn coat instantly, spilling onto the frozen floor. The heirs instinctively braced for an explosive, violent counterattack, fully expecting their terrifying instructor to unleash unholy hell upon the ambushers. Instead, Antonio did not even attempt to draw a weapon or strike back. He stood perfectly rigid, the massive blade still firmly lodged deep within his flesh. He looked the heavily armed rebel leader dead in the eyes and smiled a cold, utterly chilling smile. "Your man just assaulted an unarmed courier, carrying a highly unstable, Class 4 biological payload," Antonio stated calmly, his raspy voice entirely devoid of pain or panic. "If my resting heart rate drops below 40 beats per minute due to blood loss, the biometric thermal detonator stitched into my chest cavity will instantly vaporize this entire underground grid within a 3-mile radius. You have exactly 2 choices right now. You give my team a secure, unhindered route out of this sector immediately, or we all burn together in a beautiful flash of white light. Make your move." The rebel leader, staring at the fiercely bleeding, unflinching human, believed the bluff entirely. The sheer madness required to orchestrate such a suicidal threat paralyzed the attackers, fearing total annihilation. The rebels slowly lowered their weapons and backed away into the shadows, reluctantly granting the team free and safe passage out of the quarantine zone. They eventually retreated to a secure, abandoned, and heavily frozen bunker. The alien heirs watched in absolute, stunned silence as Antonio calmly prepared to treat his own severe injury. He gripped the handle of the embedded blade and pulled it free with a wet, sickening tear of muscle. He unceremoniously poured a bottle of crude, highly corrosive industrial alcohol directly over the gaping wound, then calmly picked up a rusted suturing needle and a thick length of metallic wire. He heated the crude needle over a portable chemical fire until the metal glowed a blinding white hot. Without a single flinch, without uttering a single groan, sigh, or displaying even a microscopic change in his facial expression, Antonio began to physically sew his own torn flesh back together. The thick, nauseating scent of burning blood and scorched human skin rapidly filled the cramped, airless room. The heirs, beings who had always prided themselves on their impenetrable armor and natural physical invulnerability, felt genuinely, physically sick to their stomachs. They realized in that gruesome moment that this frail human did not fear physical damage in the slightest. To Antonio, agonizing pain was not a deterrent. It was merely another form of currency, a visceral bargaining chip to be spent freely on the negotiation table to secure the ultimate objective of survival. Later that evening, while Antonio rested in a deeply meditative, almost comatose state to manually slow his internal blood loss, the thick tension inside the bunker grew suffocating. The youngest heir, driven by a desperate, consuming need to understand the absolute monster leading them, carefully managed to bypass the rudimentary physical lock on the personal computer terminal Antonio always carried. The machine was archaic, but the data hidden inside was a terrifying labyrinth. Digging frantically through heavily redacted, buried local files, the young heir uncovered a partially decrypted, highly classified military intelligence dossier. The cracked screen bathed his scaled face in a harsh, cold blue light. The document detailed a covert black operations military campaign that took place exactly 12 years ago. It described a brutal, systematic, and completely illegal massacre of a forward-operating elite reconnaissance team. Scanning the casualty report, a chilling fact emerged. There was only one single survivor listed in the entire decimated unit. The name on the file was Antonio Atkinson. Furthermore, the encrypted footnotes hinted at a massive, orchestrated betrayal originating from the absolute highest levels of corporate command. The youngest heir quickly disconnected the terminal, his breath hitching in his throat. He gathered the other four and whispered the dark, horrifying truth to them in the shadows. The atmosphere in the bunker instantly shifted from a state of terrified awe to a suffocating wave of extreme, paranoid suspicion. If this scarred, calculating man was the sole surviving victim of a horrific massacre deliberately orchestrated by the very corporate entities their own parents controlled, why was he here? Why was he working so hard to keep them alive in the slums? They looked over at the sleeping, heavily bleeding human resting in the dark corner of the frozen room. A chilling realization settled heavily over them, far colder than the radioactive frost outside the blast doors. Their teacher might not be preparing them to merely survive the criminal underworld. He might be preparing them for something infinitely more sinister. In the dim light, the survival instructor suddenly looked exactly like a patient executioner, quietly biding his time. The paranoid suspicion festering within the bunker rapidly crystallized into a dangerous, unified conspiracy. Driven by their desperate, consuming need to uncover their instructor's true allegiance, the five heirs conspired to lay an intricate psychological snare. They fabricated a highly sophisticated digital breadcrumb trail on the local slum network, planting fake, heavily encrypted communications, suggesting that the specific corporate black operations commanders responsible for the massacre 12 years ago were currently staging a secret, vulnerable meeting nearby. They wanted to see if the human would abandon his strict mission to protect them in favor of a suicidal, bloody vendetta. From the very first millisecond, the corrupted data packet pinged his archaic terminal. Antonio saw straight through the pathetic charade. The encryption signatures were remarkably sloppy, carrying the distinct, arrogant coding habits of the Kalen elite who had never needed to truly hide their digital footprints. Yet, he did not call them out. He deliberately chose to walk directly into their fabricated ambush to deliver a visceral, unforgettable lesson on the precise anatomy of betrayal. He led them out of the bunker under the guise of investigating the intercepted signal, guiding the tense, silent group toward the designated coordinates, a massive, decaying geothermal power plant situated on the extreme, crumbling edge of the radioactive zone. The moment they stepped into the cavernous, echoing turbine hall, the heirs initiated their trap. They attempted to blindside Antonio, intending to pin him down physically for a brutal interrogation. But the human was already a ghost, before their massive, scaled hands could even close around his shoulders. He vanished completely into the labyrinth of rusted pipes and venting steam. The mock battle that followed was a terrifying masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. Antonio absolutely refused to engage them in direct physical combat. Instead, he weaponized the highly volatile environment against their raw strength. He ruptured highly pressurized coolant lines to create blinding, freezing fogs that completely neutralized their thermal vision. He triggered localized, rapid chain reactions in the decaying chemical vats, flooding the lower subterranean levels with potent, hallucinogenic gases that thoroughly scrambled the advanced sensory organs of the aliens. Within 22 minutes, he had systematically separated the 5 towering figures, isolating each heir in a different sector of the crumbling facility. He trapped them behind impassable, towering walls of roaring fire, deep pools of highly toxic sludge, and suddenly collapsed steel girders. They were entirely at his mercy, physically exhausted, mentally disoriented, and waiting for the final, fatal executioner's blow. But the lethal strike never came. Instead of violently punishing their staggering arrogance and insubordination, Antonio tossed a small, hardened physical data drive at the feet of each trapped heir. "Boot it up," his voice echoed coldly through the archaic plant intercom system. The tone was completely devoid of anger, radiating only a freezing, terrifying absolute certainty. Inside those drives were not lectures, reprimands, or empty threats. The drives contained carefully fragmented pieces of a master decryption key, linked directly to the highest, most restricted security archives of the Kylan Royal Intelligence Network. Sitting in the filthy dirt, surrounded by hissing steam and the undeniable reality of their own failure, the heirs plugged the drives into their scavenged risk computers. As the advanced decryption software aggressively chewed through the corporate firewalls, the horrifying truth of their entire existence began to unravel line by line. They hurriedly established a private, secure audio link among themselves, frantically piecing together the fragmented files Antonio had gifted them. The data did not outline a glorious, destined future of absolute rule. It meticulously detailed a highly classified, imminent, and devastatingly bloody colonial war over a highly lucrative, resource-rich star system located on the galactic rim. More devastatingly, it laid out the Kylan Board of Directors' ultimate, sociopathic strategic gambit. The board members, their own direct blood parents, had deliberately orchestrated this supposed survival training program as a fatal dead end. The heirs were never meant to return to the gleaming obsidian spire. They were explicitly designated as high value, completely disposable, sacrificial pawns. The plan dictated that they would be quietly assassinated in the slums by elite corporate mercenaries disguised as rival faction operatives. Their tragic, highly publicized deaths would provide the perfect, legally binding, and emotionally charged political justification for the Kylan military machine to utterly annihilate the opposing factions and seize the disputed territory without facing galactic sanctions. The psychological shockwave hit them much harder than any physical thermonuclear blast could ever achieve. The previously impenetrable armor of their supreme arrogance shattered instantly into a billion meaningless pieces. The grand, noble legacy of the Kylan bloodline was brutally exposed as a rotting corpse of endless deceit and cannibalistic ambition. They were not the destined, future rulers of the cosmos. They were merely disposable meat, intentionally bred and raised solely to be slaughtered, to improve corporate profit margins and facilitate aggressive territorial expansion. The youngest heir dropped his computer, letting out a hollow, agonizing scream of pure anguish that echoed endlessly through the desolate turbine hall. The absolute certainty of their supreme existence was completely, irrevocably obliterated. The hissing steam parted, and Antonio stepped out from the shadows. His face remained an unreadable mask of deep scars and cold, calculating logic. He calmly surveyed the broken, sobbing giants scattered across the ruined concrete floor. "You set a trap to test my loyalty to a contract signed by the very people who actively want you dead," he stated softly, his voice slicing sharply through the heavy, toxic air. "You now know the exact, absolute value of your lives to the empire you so blindly worship. 0. He walked confidently to the exact center of the room, standing completely exposed and unarmed among the 5 massive, highly dangerous predators. "I am giving you one single choice today. Antonio continued, holding their gaze. You can stay here in the dirt, cry over your broken fairy tales, and die tomorrow as obedient, ignorant chess pieces for the board. Or you can stand up, swallow your fear, and let me teach you exactly how to tear down the rotten system that bred you specifically for the slaughter. For one long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the steady dripping of toxic water and the heavy, ragged breathing of the shattered heirs. Then, the largest of the group, the one who had arrogantly led the charge against Antonio on the very first day, slowly pushed himself up. He did not prepare to attack. He walked heavily over to the frail human, his massive, armored body trembling with an entirely new, terrifying kind of icy rage. Slowly, deliberately, the towering alien sank down. The heavy thud of his armored kneecaps striking the hard concrete floor echoed like a gunshot. One by one, the remaining 4 heirs crawled out from their traps, moved in silent synchronization to the center, and lowered themselves down. For the very first time in the millions of years of their species' recorded history, the impossibly proud, genetically supreme scions of the Kalan Empire knelt in perfect unison before a frail, scarred human. They looked up at Antonio with eyes burning with absolute, murderous conviction, silently begging the apex predator in human skin to forge them into weapons of ultimate destruction. The original training timeline was brutally severed, barely 72 hours into their supposed awakening. The Kalan Board of Directors triggered the premature execution phase. They dispatched the Phantom Vanguard, a legendary ultra-elite assassination squad, to purge the barren outpost, eliminate Antonio, and permanently silence the heirs. The board wanted absolutely no loose ends left breathing in the slums, under the sickly glow of a heavy, smog-choked moon. The Vanguard tightened their lethal noose around the crumbling perimeter of the bunker. These were no ordinary mercenaries. They were fully equipped with advanced optical camouflage that rendered them entirely invisible to the naked eye. And they carried miniaturized dark matter munitions capable of erasing a city block in a single heartbeat. The air itself seemed to warp and hum as the unseen killers moved into position, their thermal dampeners masking their approach flawlessly. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere was a razor edge of pure tension. The heirs instinctively looked to their scarred teacher for a tactical miracle. Instead, Antonio calmly stepped away from the main weapon console and leaned against the cold concrete wall. His arms casually crossed. "I am officially stepping down from this engagement," Antonio declared, his voice a flat, unyielding line. He locked eyes with the largest heir, the one who had knelt first in the turbine hall. "You have the command. Direct the counteroffensive. Show me exactly what you have learned, or die here in the dark." A fleeting second of sheer panic rippled through the alien youths, but it was instantly swallowed by a cold, calculating focus. The leader stepped up, his massive armored frame moving with a new, terrifying quietness. He did not order a frantic frontal assault. He ordered absolute silence and deep digital immersion, applying Antonio's ruthless lessons flawlessly. The heirs did not try to outgun the invisible assassins. They attacked the Vanguard's supreme confidence and their heavy reliance on high-end technology. The heirs recognized that the advanced optical camouflage required immense processing power, creating a microsecond latency in the assassin's peripheral sensor arrays. Working in perfect, unspoken synchronization, the heirs flooded the immediate exterior with dense, localized electromagnetic interference, effectively blinding the Vanguard's tactical drone support and creating massive sensor blind spots. Then came the psychological manipulation. The youngest heir, his scaled fingers flying across a scavenged terminal, successfully pierced the heavily encrypted communication network of the elite squad. He did not shut the network down. Instead, he seamlessly spliced in manipulated audio profiles, mimicking the exact, distinct voice of the Vanguard commander. "Fake. Highly aggressive orders began flooding the assassins' earpieces. Phantom heat signatures were digitally projected directly into their tactical visors. The Vanguard, previously a machine of flawless precision, descended into sudden, violent paranoia, believing they were being heavily flanked by a massive, unseen army of rival mercenaries. The elite assassins panicked. Following the false commands, two invisible snipers repositioned directly into the crossfire of their own heavy gunners. High-velocity rounds tore through the night, shattering optical cloaks and sending elite killers crashing to the ground, heavily incapacitated by friendly fire. The airs orchestrated a beautiful, terrifying symphony of chaos without firing a single lethal shot. However, the simulation of war never survives reality without extracting a physical toll. In the swirling dust and chaotic crossfire, a lone, veteran Vanguard sniper saw through the digital illusion. He bypassed his corrupted visor, relying entirely on analog iron sights, and locked his heavy rail rifle squarely onto the chest of the youngest heir, who was completely consumed by maintaining the hacking process. The hyper-accelerated slug fired with a deafening, supersonic crack. The youngest heir did not even have the time to look up. But Antonio did, moving with a speed that seemingly defied human biology. Antonio launched himself across the concrete room. He slammed brutally into the young alien, throwing them both violently out of the fatal trajectory. The heavy sniper round tore straight through Antonio's right shoulder, a devastating impact that shattered bone and spun the human violently to the floor in a bright spray of crimson blood. The remaining heirs erupted in a calculated fury. They did not succumb to their species' natural bloodlust, moving as a single, unstoppable unit. They flanked the rogue sniper, using their massive physical frames not to crush him, but to flawlessly disarm and pin him to the hard ground. Within exactly 3 minutes, the entire legendary Phantom Vanguard squad was completely neutralized, securely bound, and stripped of their advanced weapon systems. The heirs had decimated the deadliest force in the known galaxy without taking a single life, entirely breaking the ancient, bloodthirsty stereotype of their aggressive race. They had won through absolute tactical supremacy. The bunker fell dead silent, save for the ragged breathing of the captured assassins. The youngest heir rushed frantically to Antonio's side. The human was bleeding profusely, his right arm hanging uselessly. Yet, Antonio planted his boots firmly on the ground and, gritting his teeth through unimaginable agony, forced himself to stand perfectly straight. He looked down at the disabled assassins, then up at his 5 students. A grim, terrifying pride flickered in his cold eyes. "Load every single weapon you just scavenged," Antonio ordered, his raspy voice slicing cleanly through the pain. "We have exactly 4 hours before the board realizes their executioners have failed. Prepare your gear. We are walking out of this radioactive hell, and we are taking this war directly to the corporate headquarters." The heavy obsidian doors of the Grand Kalan corporate apex shattered inward with a deafening crash. Millions of viewers across the known spiral arm were currently tuned into the live galactic broadcast, expecting to see the board of directors announce record-breaking quarterly profits. Instead, the entire galaxy watched in absolute shock as 5 heavily armored figures marched directly into the luxurious, brightly lit boardroom. Flanking them was a single, heavily scarred human, his right arm bound tightly in a makeshift sling, soaked in dried blood. The 10 ruling members of the board of directors froze in their high-backed hover chairs. They stared in sheer, unadulterated terror at the children they had condemned to die in the toxic depths. The parents had expected these youths, if they miraculously survived, to return as mindless, traumatized, bloodthirsty beasts, driven insane by the slums. Instead, the 5 heirs stood perfectly still, radiating the freezing, untouchable composure of absolute tactical masters. They moved not with wild rage, but with the terrifying, silent precision of a tightening noose. Without uttering a single word of greeting or furious accusation, Antonio walked straight to the central holographic projector of the boardroom. He reached into his torn jacket with his good hand, pulled out a small, cracked data drive, and slammed it into the master console. With one single keystroke, he bypassed the most advanced firewall in the galaxy. He executed a global network override, hijacking the live broadcast feed across billions of planets. The majestic corporate logos dissolved, replaced instantly by undeniable damning evidence. Unredacted military logs flooded the screens, detailing the exact Black Operations massacre from 12 years ago that had wiped out Antonio's entire reconnaissance squad. But the exposure did not stop there. The broadcast seamlessly transitioned into the highly classified, decrypted audio recordings of the board members themselves. The galaxy listened in horrifying silence as these refined rulers calmly calculated the exact political value of sacrificing their own direct offspring to spark a profitable colonial war. The grand revelation struck the room like a physical shockwave. The ultimate plot twist was laid bare for the entire universe to witness. This entire survival curriculum, from the very first moment the human was hired, was never a simple training contract. It was a masterfully orchestrated, flawlessly executed game of cosmic chess. Antonio had spent 12 long years weaving this exact scenario. He had patiently groomed the very children of his mortal enemies, forging them into the exact weapons he needed to dismantle the empire from the inside out. He had used the board's supreme arrogance as the instrument of their own total destruction. Panicking, the chairman of the board screamed for the royal security detail. Dozens of heavily armed elite guards flooded the room, raising their plasma rifles to execute the intruders. Before a single trigger could be pulled, the largest heir simply raised his hand. Instantly, every single plasma rifle in the room powered down with a pathetic, dying hum. The kinetic shields of the guards collapsed, and their armor locked into rigid paralysis. The heirs had already completely hijacked the Supreme Command protocols of the Royal Security Matrix while riding the elevator up to the apex. The parents were entirely defenseless, stripped of their power by the very heirs they had discarded. The chairman fell to his knees, bracing for a brutal, bloody execution. He expected the heirs to tear the board members apart with their bare hands, succumbing to the violent nature of their species. But the youngest heir stepped forward, his voice a calm, echoing command that resonated across the hijacked galaxy. "We will not validate your pathetic cycle of bloodshed," the young heir declared smoothly. "You are no longer the rulers of this empire. We have already initiated a complete financial purge. Your infinite bank accounts have been zeroed out. Your luxury estates are seized. You are hereby exiled." Instead of delivering a swift, merciful death, the heirs condemned the board of directors to a fate far worse for the galactic elite. The royal guards, now under the absolute command of the heirs, dragged the screaming, desperate parents away. They were to be thrown directly into the very same toxic, freezing slum where the vanguard assassins had been sent just hours before. Stripped of all wealth and left to survive at the absolute bottom of the food chain. The perfect, bloodless revenge was fully realized. The Kalan Empire had been conquered without a single casualty in the boardroom. His lifelong mission finally complete. Antonio turned away from the shimmering galactic broadcast. He slowly walked toward the shattered entrance, preparing to disappear back into the dark void of space. The new rulers of the galaxy desperately called out to him, practically begging the scarred human to stay, offering him absolute command, unlimited wealth, and the title of Supreme Military Advisor. Antonio firmly rejected it all without breaking his stride. As he reached the threshold, a terrified, trembling corporate reporter shoved a microphone toward him, asking why he had spared the lives of the exact monsters who had brutally slaughtered his friends and ruined his entire existence. Antonio paused. He looked back over his shoulder, a small, weary, but genuinely peaceful smile breaking through his scars. Because the most devastating revenge you can ever inflict upon a tyrant, Antonio replied softly, is not to kill them. It is to take their absolute greatest legacy and turn it into an unstoppable weapon that protects the peace they tried to destroy. With that, the human walked away into the shadows, leaving behind an immortal, terrifying legend of a frail creature who possessed the absolute mind of the universe's ultimate apex predator. Thank you so very much to all our wonderful listeners for staying with us through this incredible journey across the stars. We would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please let us know your location in the comments below. If you enjoyed this thrilling story and want to help keep our channel alive, please consider supporting us with just a $1 donation. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the secure PayPal link located in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generous support ensures our hard-working team can continue to feed their families and keep creating these amazing universes for you. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next adventure.